Roll Tide Fishing Buddies, Mr. Bass here, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about baits to use in the springtime. And by springtime, I mean when the water's still cold springtime. Wintertime is winding down. We're close to the end of February now, and the water's still frozen in parts here, and it's thawing in other parts. And as that as the day gets longer, the light pattern gets longer, the nighttime temps start warming up, the bass will start moving. They will start coming out of the deeper water and start thinking about heading to the shallows for the spawn. So I'm really talking kind of the pre-spawn area up into the spawn. And really, some of these baits will be effective beyond that as well. I don't have a script here, so I might trip over myself some because I'm just going to kind of go off the top of my head and talk about things that I use and things that I think work. And these are my opinions. I may not be perfect on this stuff. Some people seem to get a little angry if I have an opinion about a certain bait that they don't like, or that they like that maybe I don't like. But you know, a lot of baits come down to personal preference. It doesn't mean they're bad, doesn't mean they're good. This reality is some of us like some baits better than others. But I will tell you that the baits that I'm gonna show you and talk about are effective for this time of year. So I'm gonna start with crankbaits. Crankbaits are very effective in the pre-spawn, in the kind of cooler temps, but crankbaits are effective year-round. So there are different schools of thought, but one consistent school of thought is that you want, in the wintertime, you want crankbaits with a tighter wobble in the water. More of a subtle movement within the water. Now, the only person I've heard really challenge this is David Dudley. If you go watch some of his videos, he kind of challenges this notion. I believe he's the one. But me personally, I kind of go along with that, and usually in the wintertime or early spring, cooler water temps, I'm going to be throwing a crankbait that has a tighter wobble. So let me show you a few. I'm going to start with a tried and true, and this crankbait works in the winter and in the spring. This is a Rapala Shad Rap, and you can see it's skinny. And what you'll notice, a lot of these springtime baits are usually narrow. Notice this one here. What I've done with these, with my Shad Raps, is I have just taken a marker and written on there how deep these things run, and the depth depends upon how heavy or light of line you use. For all my crankbait fishing, I like to use rods with a moderate taper. So there's different thoughts on rods, what kind of rods work. Really, I think the most important thing I've learned, or for me that works for me, is you want a moderate taper. You don't want a really fast or extra fast taper. You want a moderate taper that will help you load up that treble hook without pulling it out of their mouth. That to me is the most important. Whether you use fiberglass or graphite or some mixture, is kind of up to you. So this Shad Rap, this is kind of a big one. This is not the size I use most of the time. Here's a smaller one, you know, to kind of give you some reference. And I don't know, I've got even smaller size that I use a lot of times as well. This is a good color, but I tell you, early spring, I like the oranges and the reds too, and I found that this is a good color as well. I don't know the name of this color, but if I can find it, I'll put it on the screen for you. So these Shad Raps by Rapala are very good cold water crankbaits. So, oh, here's one of the small ones right here. This is kind of the one I throw more frequently, and it dives 4 to 9 feet. Okay, that's a tried and true. You can't go wrong with a Shad Rap. Okay, then here's another one that I've heard works great. I don't have a lot of, I haven't thrown this a lot, but this again is a good color for springtime, early springtime fishing. And as you can see, very narrow as well. These narrow, flat-sided crankbaits are the kind that work good in cold water. This is a bomber. It's called a Flat A. And I'll show you a few different colors. This one is good. This one's nice. This here, this orange, these kind of oranges work good in the spring, early spring. And so that just gives you a few. This one here is really good as well. What I really like are the old wiggle warts. Check out this. This is just a small sampling of my collection. I've got a ton of these bad boys, and they work great in the Ozarks. And I kind of live in the Ozark areas, but in Missouri, and Oklahoma, in Arkansas, in Tennessee, parts of Texas, these wiggle warts work great in cold water. So I'll show you a couple of these. Here's one of my all-time go-to colors, and I'll just give you the nomenclature. They call this the V59, Victor V59. And these are not flat-sided, but they have an incredibly crazy wobble. Now what's interesting about these, a lot of the Ozark lakes they're all reservoirs as far as I know, and they've got kind of a lot of limestone rock cliff type faces and bluffs, and these baits tend to work really well in that kind of a lake. And so when it comes to springtime fishing, like say on Table Rock, Lake of the Ozarks, you're going to see the pros always throw in wiggle warts. Every one of them will have warts, and they'll have a lot of these original pre-Rapala brand by Storm. Storm made these. So that's a really excellent color. Any of the crawdad colors are great. Here's another one that's great. This is called the V52. Now, and I think David Dudley, this is one of the examples he uses that kind of goes against the grain when you're talking about a tight shimmy or a tight wobble, because the wiggle wart really shines in cold water better than it does in warm water, and it doesn't have a tight wobble at all. It really is very erratic. That was the V37 that I just showed you there. Here's another popular color. This is the SP, meaning it suspends, the SP54. And I might do more on wiggle warts. I probably should do some more wiggle wart videos. And here's another great standby that works fantastic in the Ozarks, and that is the V86. So one thing I would caution you about, and I used to be really bad about this, and I've gotten a lot better through the years, is I'd be watching a video or see a pro, see something he's using that just works fantastic, and I'd run out and buy it, only to discover that I shouldn't have bought that, because that what's-a-ma-does-it really works great up in upstate New York fisheries for smallmouth, but it doesn't really do that well. It's not that effective down in the Ozarks for largemouth bass. And so this wiggleworts is a perfect example. You may or may not need to go out and buy you some wiggleworts. If you live in certain parts of the country, you may not even want to mess with wiggleworts, but there are certain parts where they really shine, and don't ask me why. I've never figured that out. I don't know why. But anyway, here's another crankbait. These little Bagleys also work well in cold water. I don't even know what this thing is called. I just know Bagley makes it. And that's a bluegill pattern. You can tell that's crazy good looking bait. Those do really well. Another Rapala bait. You probably recognize this. It's called the DT. DT is an acronym that means dives to, and then they have a depth. So there'll be a DT4, a DT6, a DT10, and this here is a DT6 probably. That's a DT6. This color I've had tons of luck with in the wintertime, or spring, I mean, cold weather. Just a red craw color. Great baits. Okay, one other crankbait that I forgot about, and as I was putting my other crankbaits back, I saw this one that I wanted to touch on. And these are by 6 Sense. And I got the eye worn off on this one. 6 Sense lures. That's what the eye looks like. This is called the Flat 75X. And again, narrow, flat-sided crankbait. Works great in cold water. I don't know what color this is because I went on tacklewarehouse.com and I don't see this color on here. One that looks kind of similar is Brown Eye Special, but I have this yellow belly, and Brown Eye Special doesn't look like it has a yellow belly. There's another one called Jungle Rose and Lava Truce that are kind of like this, but I don't see it. So I don't know if they're still making this one or what. But this color I've had a lot of luck with, as you can tell. Here's another one. This is one that I've had luck with too, but this is a pretty much a new one. I don't think this one I've actually fished with yet. But this is another. I like this color, generally speaking, in the water that we fish around here is not ultra clear, but it can be muddy, but usually it's just kind of stained. And this blue back works really good. And I do have the color on that one. This one's called Blue True Shad. But I really can't talk about cold water crankbaits without talking about this 6 Sense bait. It's excellent. It really is very good, and so gotta mention that. Okay, number 2, still kind of in the crankbait family, is the lipless crankbait. And I've got all kinds of lipless crankbaits. They really work great in a lot of different conditions. This one here is the Rapala Rip and Wrap 07. I've got this one in several different colors and a very good rattle trap sort of bait, lipless crankbait. Okay, here's another one. This is made by Strike King. It's called a Red Eye Shad. And again, these kind of colors are the ones that I throw this time of year. What else have I got in here? Here's another red-eye shad, different color. Works quite well. Here is a Cordell rattle trap. Okay, so not made by Bill Lewis. And then here is the rattle trap made by Bill Lewis. And you can see, boy, they are very, very similar, to say the least. Here's one that I don't throw as much in cold water because of the shape of it. Not to say that it wouldn't work in cold water, but generally speaking, I tend to wait till a little later in the spring. This one is made to look very lifelike. This is a live target lipless crankbait, and you can see it's made to look like a real crawdad. Check that out. Green eyes. Pretty cool looking. It's called the Clackenrap, and I really like this one. I've had a lot of luck with this through the years. Again, though, this one I don't throw as much in really cold water. I wait till the spring, kind of during the spawn and even post-spawn. But this thing really catches them. It's called the Clackenrap Excalibur. And this one catches fish really well, too. And then here's a few more, just real quick, kind of more springtime type colors that I will throw. These are Bill Lewis rattle traps. Just show you a couple of more of their colors. This one, it's got some shine, little red tint here that has a blue back. And then here's another one that's more of a traditional kind of springtime, orangey, reddish craw color. A little more subtle than the super bright red. Sometimes it works well. So, rattle traps, lipless cranks, whatever you want to call them, red-eye shads, good baits for wintertime. I'll tell you a little story real quick. Buddy of mine, we're down in Guntersville fishing in the wintertime or spring, early spring. And no matter what we fished with, we could not get a bite. The water was cold. It was in the 40s. So that tells you how cold. 40s at Guntersville is cold. Couldn't get a bite. So we said to ourselves, let's go somewhere else, try somewhere else. So just kind of on a wild hare, we drove up to Tennessee and went to Chickamauga. Fished a day there, same thing. We could not get anything to work. So then we're like, we're not going to have a bad fishing trip. Let's go to Florida. So we drove down to the St. Johns River the next day, and that took us like 8 hours to get down there. Then when we got down there, we fished the St. Johns River, and we had some luck fishing with some Cincos, and because down in Florida, the spawn was already on. But shortly after we got there, this massive thunderstorm came through. I mean, it was just raining buckets and buckets and buckets. And we checked the forecast. We should have done that before we went down there. And this storm was supposed to last like 3 days straight. So we turned around and headed back to Alabama. We went straight back to Guntersville. And we broke out one of these rattle traps, a red rattle trap, and started throwing it. And it was lights out. The next 2 days, we caught fish after fish after fish after fish after fish. And we're thinking, man, why did we go to Florida? Why did we go to Tennessee? If we just tried to throw a rattle trap the first day, we could have had all these days of fun fishing. But hey, live and learn. That's the way it goes sometimes. Let's go to the next one. Next one, no-brainer, right? Jerkbaits. I really don't even need to talk much about this, but anytime the water's cold, although warm water, you can catch them on warm water too. I mean, let's face it, you can. But just break out one of these bad boys when it's cold. Always try a jerk bait, because jerk baits are going to get you fish usually. I really like this brand. This is Lucky Strike. Lucky Strike. You can get these at Walmart. The Rick Clunn version, Lucky Strike crankbaits. Ton of great colors. Great action in the water. They catch fish. They're durable, and they're cheap compared to most crankbaits or jerkbaits out there. They are cheap. So, you know, a Megabass is going to cost you $25. This thing you can get for like $8. So, and I've fished side by side with the Megabass, and in my opinion, it's many times just as good. Now, there are some times where that Megabass really shines and better than others. Here's another one. Just kind of give you different color. If you want to go something more expensive, then here you go. Here's the Megabass. $26 or so for this Vision 110 Plus. Here's one of my favorite Lucky Strike colors. Back to the Rick Clunn $8 bait. I think this is called like Sour Apple. Really good. Here's a Rapala. This is called the Shadow Wrap. A lot of people like those. This is a go-to, tried and true, dyed in the wool. The Smithwick Rattling Rogue. These jerk baits catch fish. They're old school. Jason Christie's sponsored by these guys, and he loves them. If you want to know about these, go look at Jason Christie's website. But again, they work good in the cold. Okay, this next bait, I am going to say you should use in the springtime. The reality is, I fish this bait all year round, and it is probably my favorite go-to technique at the moment. I know if I were to analyze what bait I fished with more than any other last year, it would be this one. And that is the chatterbait. Now, this is Z-Man created the chatterbait, and this is the jackhammer version of the chatterbait. This is a fantastic bait, but really lots of different brands work great. So in the springtime, I'm going to throw something kind of green pumpkinish or bluegill-ish usually. This one here is called Brett's Bluegill, and you can see it's got some orange strands, orange under the bottom of the head. It's an excellent color. Here is another brand, and you can see this is just kind of plain green pumpkin. I like these darker heads, black or green. Not that the gold and silver don't work fine too, but there's something sometimes about kind of more of a subtle color, I think, that really sometimes matters. Another one I would throw quite a bit when it's really, the water's really stained, is black and blue. You can't go wrong with black and blue and stained water. And then, of course, you're going to need some sort of a shad pattern sometimes. In fact, year-round, I probably throw something white or white with chartreuse more than I do any other color, to tell you the truth. But my second most favorite color is this bluegill color. And then early springtime when I'm throwing reds, I'll throw something like this. And my buddy who's sponsored by these guys put me on to this Finch Nasty Thumper. And it's got really good action. And you know, this color works during that spring pre-spawn time. This is called Rayburn Red is their color. So how do you fish this? I mean, the beauty of a chatterbait is you can just kind of crank and wind, chuck and wind. Now there are some other retrieves that sometimes you need to use, but generally speaking, a chuck and wind retrieve works pretty good. I've heard different sizes on this. I tend to like a medium heavy to heavy rod. I know some guys go a little lighter, but just for me, I like the medium heavy to heavy rod, usually at least 7 foot long, sometimes longer than that. And I go with heavier line. I almost always throw it on fluorocarbon. I'll use a pretty fast reel, like a 7-to-1 or an 8-to-1 reel. And heavy fluorocarbon, like I usually, about as light as I go, is 15-pound test, and really usually more like 17 to 20-pound test. But I know some guys go with lighter line. The chatterbait is an excellent colder water pre-spawn lure, but it works even better when the water warms up, and it shines in the grass. It's just fantastic in the grass. Okay, I've got 2 more techniques. There's actually quite a few more that you could throw in the springtime, pre-spawn type water. But I've got 2 more I'm going to show you, and I don't know how frequently other people use these baits in the pre-spawn, but I'd say quite a few do at times. The first is a jig, and this is my favorite jig in the pre-spawn. It's made by Jewel Baits, and it's called the Pro Spider Jig. And you can see I've got quite a few here. When you get to talking about colors for jigs, I think, are more about water clarity than anything. So in the springtime, I'm going to go anywhere from black and blue to more of more natural type colors. But I will get into, like, this is a good color here that I like to throw. This is called Missouri Craw. This bait has a very subtle action in the water, and I tend to go with the smaller size. This here is a 7/16 size, which is not quite a ½ ounce. Usually I don't start throwing this until warmer water. I tend to go with the 5/16 size when the water's really cooler, and that's this size right here. This is the black and blue color, and this is just it's a small profile. It's very subtle. It has a nice band for rattles, and I put rattles on it. And then in the springtime, I'll put like a chunk trailer, a trailer that doesn't have a lot of action. I tend to think in the colder water, you want not a lot of movement, not a lot of action with your trailer. So I'll put something like this on it. Zoom Big Salty Chunk. These things tend to work, I feel, really quite well in the colder water months. So, you know, you just put that together. It's a pretty nice combination, really. So for me in the springtime, this is not what I'll start with. I'll try those other kind of reactionary baits like the crankbaits, the chatterbaits. But if I'm not getting a reaction strike, a reaction bite, then I'm going to slow it down, and I'm going to go with this or the other technique. I had said I had two techniques. These last two techniques are more of a subtle, slow it down. So this is my final technique. Bleep. Bleep. Cinco. Cinco de Mayo. This bad boy may be the greatest bait of all time. The Cinco. And I fish this a lot in cold water, and I get a lot of baits in cold water. And when I say cold, I'm talking 38 degrees cold, and then all other temperatures in between. Now, in the spring, I will even use this as a search bait. And the way I do that is I Texas rig it. I don't wacky rig it. Wacky rig is just like this, putting a hook right here where my fingers are, and it kind of drops down. Wacky rigging takes way too long if you're using it for a search bait. If you know where the fish are, you can drop it on them. But I just Texas rig it. This is a green pumpkin color. Great color. Natural, not too fancy. Here's another color I like to throw. Black. If I need a little more flash in the pan, I'll go with something like this. It has some chartreuse on the tail, tip of the tail. And this I use really only in the springtime, especially more on the spawn. I will throw this pre-spawn, but I like to throw this in beds. This color aggravates them. So this is another good one too, a red laminate. All these colors I could throw in the springtime. So I'll show you a couple more. If the water's dirty, I'm going to throw this bad boy. Black and blue with a bright blue tail. Here's another good natural color. This is one I like in the springtime too. It's more of a pumpkin. Not green pumpkin, just pumpkin. And this one I usually don't throw in the spring. I throw this in the fall when the shad are really busting. The only time I will throw this in the spring, unless I see some bait fish that are the forage that look just like it, is I will throw this on beds as well. Anything kind of bright and like that red or this white on beds works good. So that's kind of it. I really think that combination is a great choice if you're looking for what should I fish with this spring before they're up shallow on the beds. And these baits can be used all the way through the spawn as well. But I hope that helps. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. I would appreciate it. Let me know what you think. Let me know what are your favorite cold water spring baits. And love to hear what you have to say.